Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're watching. The channel's called Ratchet. My name's Andrew, and on this episode, I battle with a poorly engine, I 3D print some parts, and I find out how much this thing weighs. Run the title. Welcome to the channel if you're new. If you're not, thank you for tuning back in for yet another episode. So this one is just an insight into what it's like dealing with one of these cars. I'm battling with some problems, I'm making some bits, and I'm still doing some fun stuff. So I'm hoping there's a little bit of everything for everyone. Now, if you are new to the channel, then make sure you click up there to the playlist and the other 50 odd videos that I have released in the rebuild and restoration of my GT40. For those that keep coming back for more, thank you as always. I always really enjoy reading your comments. And if you haven't subscribed, then please consider doing so because it does help the channel grow and expand to a wider audience. So I think that's enough of an intro. Let's get on with the video. So I wasn't planning on filming any of this. A spark plug change, oil and filter change isn't the most interesting viewing, even for the most diehard of followers. But as with everything with this car, nothing goes according to plan. So what I need to do is give you a little roundup of what's happened so far, what I've uncovered, and what on earth I'm going to do about it. With the car back from the dyno session, it sat in the garage for a couple of days. Now, during that time, there was a small pool of oil forming on the garage floor around the front edge of the engine area. Now, wanting to find out where on earth that was coming from, I got the car jacked up and had a crawl underneath, fearing that it might have been the front main seal. Now, thankfully, it doesn't look to be the case. It looks like it's actually the sump gasket. Now, with my planned oil change in mind, I thought now's a good time, get the oil dropped, get the sump off and inspect that gasket and get a new one on order if needed. So what became apparent very quickly when starting to undo the oil pan bolts was the fact that they were only gripping on by 2 or 3 threads at a maximum. This engine has got an aluminium sump fitted and it's got a much thicker rim versus the original pressed steel oil sump, for example. I'm guessing the decision was made to reuse the original bolts instead of sourcing longer bolts, but it wasn't a very clever idea and it's something that I definitely had to sort out and put right. Because these bolts were holding on by so little, unfortunately what I did find was one of the holes in the block was threaded. I did have some helicoils, so I was able to drill and tap the block and insert a new helicoil, making good that hole. So I'm glad I caught it, and I'm certainly going to remediate it by getting some much longer bolts to get a real good bite into the block to stop this ever happening again. Now that's the backstory all caught up with. It was clear that this job wasn't going to be straightforward, so I now picked up the camera and started to film some footage so you can follow along the rest of the way. So with the sump removed from the car and on the bench, I offered up the new one-piece gasket from Mr. Gasket. Here you can see the alignment pegs that come with the kit as well, just holding it into place. Then underneath the car, wiping off any excess oil before wiping down all of the mating surfaces with acetone to make sure that they were as clean as possible to get the best seal against the gasket, the block and the actual sump pan. So here you can see the rows of bolts and the palaver that I had to go through to try and get a working solution. So the top row are the original bolts that I removed from the car. The second row are the ones that came supplied with the Mr. Gasket set, which I can only assume are suitable for the pressed steel pan, which has the much thinner edge flange. And the third row you can see are the bolts that I've measured up and sourced myself to give the best bite into the block as possible. Finally, back underneath the car to put the pan into place, following the torque procedure, which is basically a crisscross pattern working from the middle of the sump outwards to pull that pan nice and level up to the underside of the block. Finally, the oil and the filter. I phoned up Real Steel just to double check what oil they recommended, and it was a Valvoline VR1 2050, so I ordered 10 litres of that. It's going to give me some spare ready for the next oil change in the future. And with the car lowered back down onto the ground, I was able to give it a drink of that fresh Valvoline before then swapping out the old spark plugs to some new NGKs as recommended by Page Motorsport. Some of you eagle-eye viewers might have noticed that I had removed the bundle of snakes from the car. Now that was because I was having an issue with the Cerakote. It looked like there was rust forming below the actual Cerakote. So what I did was forward a couple of photos of a couple of the worst areas down to the Cerakoting company. And once they'd had a look, they said, get the exhaust stripped off, get it down to us, and we'll take a proper look and do whatever's necessary to remediate. Now, once they had blasted one of the exhaust headers, they noticed that there was some microscopic pinholes actually in the mild steel tubing. And what that was doing was allowing moisture from the inside of the tube to penetrate up through the wall of the tube and then start to form rust in between the top of the mild steel and the underside of the Cerakote. So what they wanted to do was try and rule out this possibly happening again. So these exhaust headers have had 2 coatings of Cerakote on the recommendation of Cerakote, and we're hoping that this is enough to stop the issue forming again. So I can only thank them enough for jumping on this, and they have done an absolute first-class job. Exhaust looks perfect once more, and I'm hoping it will do for a long time to come. There's nothing like celebrating a job well done by jumping in the driver's seat and going for a drive around some of my favourite country roads. Now, I was only out for probably 20 minutes, getting the car up to temperature and just enjoying being back in the driver's seat after it's been laid up for a few months over winter. Now, when I got home, I pulled the car into the garage and walked away feeling quite smug on a job well done. Now, unfortunately, coming back out to the car a few hours later, I popped the back only to look down and see there was still the same drips of oil around the front edge of that sump pan. Now, not as bad as it was, but there was still some oil leaking. So, what you can see behind me, well, you can't really make out, but the car is up on axle stands because I have dropped the oil, removed the sump, cleaned everything up again. I've been more liberal with the application of the gasket sealant this time, certainly around the front edge of the sump and the timing cover. Everything's now back together and I'm waiting on the gasket sealant to dry before then filling it with oil and going through the whole palaver again. So I hope that I've fixed it this time. I've had a peer up behind the timing cover and the harmonic balancer, and I can't see any traces of oil leaking from the front main seal. I can't see any other traces of oil coming from anywhere else other than this damn sump gasket. So I hope this second time round I've nailed it, but I will of course let you know how it goes. Still wanting to achieve something positive whilst trying to deal with this damn oil leak, I dusted off my 3D printer that I've had for a number of years but never really put it to any good purpose. I have made these very simple objects. Now they are carb caps for the top of my Quad 48s to stop any dust and dirt falling into the top of those while the car is sat in the garage. I couldn't go with the classic tennis ball in the top of the carburettor because I didn't have sufficient space between the backmost carburettor and the rear screen. I used a software called Fusion 360. Now, I am by no means in any way, shape or form up to speed with 3D printing, so I have just done my best with settings and goodness knows what else to try and make these as respectable as possible. And after a few goes and tweaking of settings and bits and pieces, I was happy with the quality that I was able to turn out with my little printer. They fit perfectly and look like they're going to be perfect for the job. Something else that I wanted to share with you guys that I am quite proud of, and that is the fact the car has made it into its first publication. This is the GT40 Enthusiast Club magazine, and my car has made it into the centre spread. Now, the photos used were taken by a professional photographer at a Wheels on Wednesday Cars and Coffee event. It's because of his killer shots that I think really made this spread look quite special, so thank you to him for that. And one final piece of news that I do want to share with you guys is the fact that I've had the car weighed. On one of the few little trips out, oil leak checking, I drove past a place that had a weigh bridge. Dived in there, got chatting to the guys about the car and asked if I could stick the car on the scales, which I'm pleased to say they let me. Now, I had no idea how much this thing was going to weigh. Certainly post-rebuild with the addition of all of the aluminium panelling and goodness knows what else. But car went on the scales, all fluids, both tanks are over half full with petrol, and it came in at 1,000 kilos exactly, 1 metric ton. So I am really quite shocked with how little it does weigh. I'm obviously very pleased. So now I know 307.4 brake, 1,000 kilos. It's not a bad power to weight ratio, and it certainly makes for a fun drive. And I think for this episode, this is about my lot. I hope this has gone to show that the car is forever evolving for good and for bad. But it's just part and parcel of ownership of one of these things, and I'm still loving every minute, he says, battling with an oil leak. But you know what I'm trying to say, and I really do enjoy sharing this journey with you guys. So up until the next episode, I'll catch you next time.